We all know of WWE, AEW, TNA, and other TV wrestling companies, but outside of them exists a whole world of wrestling companies all over the globe. And many of them don't last very long, with some of them going bust due to a variety of reasons, whether it be poor decision making, bad spending, or finding themselves in controversy. So like the video, and let's talk about that. Let's talk about failed wrestling companies that went bust. Wrestle Circus held its first show in October 2016 and started out as an indie promotion showcasing some of the best talent from Texas and surrounding areas with some stars sprinkled in. But it would evolve very quickly into one of the top indie promotions where many of the biggest stars today that we see in WWE and AEW would perform on. I mean, even just on their first show, they had the likes of Adam Page, Dijak, Keith Lee, Sammy Guevara, Ricky Starks, EC3, and other talent you might recognize. And from here, the show got bigger, with more and more talent from across the country appearing on the shows, including guys who are currently on TV like Cody Rhodes, who made a few appearances in 2017. And Wrestle Circus were also one of the first wrestling companies to use Twitch to livestream their shows, and by using Twitch to livestream their shows, it meant they could use and broadcast talent who were under Impact or AAA contracts without violating their contracts, and thus Wrestle Circus became an appealing promotion for wrestlers to work on because of the Twitch integration. And by the tail end of 2017, Wrestle Circus had loads of momentum and were fresh off doing a show headlined by Cody Rhodes, but in November of 2017, just a few days before their upcoming show for the month, it was suddenly announced that the show was cancelled. Nothing was said as to why this had happened, and fans and talent were both left in the dark. But it was eventually revealed and found out that it was due to the promoter's personal health issues, but still little info was out there. However, it was assumed that the circus was dead. That was until out of nowhere a year later they came back for a run of 2 more shows before they had to go on hiatus again due to not being able to find a building to run the shows in. And after another year of quiet, the circus would return again in May 2019 and genuinely looked like Wrestle Circus was back, as they would keep running events and announce their next event at each event. A shot for every time I said event. However, lightning would strike twice, as just a couple of days before their July 28th event, the show was cancelled, with fans and wrestlers left in the dark once again. And it wouldn't be until an email was leaked from the promoter to the wrestlers where we found out what had happened. It basically said that the show was cancelled and Wrestle Circus is shut for good, as he just wasn't fit to be a wrestling promoter. And that bringing back Wrestle Circus was a big mistake that he did against the advice of a lot of people. Talent were left stranded, fans were left wanting refunds, and since then, Wrestle Circus has not returned, and it's been 5 years now, so I highly doubt that it ever does return. Chikara opened its doors in the year 2000, first as a wrestling school under the name of the Wrestle Factory, founded by Mike Quackenbush and Tom Carter. And in 2002, it would expand into the wrestling promotion known as Chikara, and Chikara was a unique promotion as it would attract top indie talent, including the likes of CM Punk, who worked the first ever Chikara show. And while some talent like Punk just worked under themselves and their regular characters, oftentimes talent would come in and work under a completely different character and a completely different name and look. Chikara in a way was a non-canon promotion where wrestlers would come in and do stuff completely differently to what they were usually doing on other promotions. And Chikara itself was also like if a comic book was real and was a wrestling promotion. All the shows were connected, and there is so much lore and history to Chikara and all their storylines that I couldn't even begin to be able to discuss it all in this video. But throughout the 2000s, Chikara would remain one of the top indie promotions and a true alternative to your WWEs, TNAs, and any other wrestling promotion out there. Their big shows were their King of Trios shows, which was a yearly trios tournament they did, and they had some awesome teams competing each year, including some of the biggest names in the indies at the time. There were teams that were themed, such as when Jordan Grace, P.E. Williams, and Scott Steiner all teamed up, and they'd also do reunions, such as when Justin Gabriel Steel, Darren Young, and Michael Tarver reunited in 2018 as the Nexus for the tournament. However, there was definitely a turning point for Chikara where their downfall begun, and whilst factors like WWE and other major companies scooping up all the indie talent definitely played a part in the wrestling company's demise, Chikara had already lost a large portion of its fan base after the promotion shut down for a year as part of a storyline. When Chikara did return from that storyline shutdown, I don't even know what to call it, many of its fans didn't return, and it's said that pre-shutdown and post-shutdown Chikara are two completely different eras for the company. And it kind of went from being a good alternative wrestling company that you could show to anyone to being a really niche wrestling company that you kind of had to be in the know of wrestling to really enjoy. But what would ultimately kill Chikara though would come during the pandemic when owner Mike Quackenbush and several trainees were accused by a former female trainee of bullying, racism, and homophobia. This led to many Chikara talent re-signing from the promotion following these accusations, and Mike Quackenbush would do the same, as it was announced on June 24, 2020 that the promotion would be shutting its doors and closing down permanently. Chikara was a promotion with a cult following, and a following which is probably all gone now and wouldn't be interested in a Chikara return, but it's been 4 years, so I highly doubt that we'll ever see Chikara make a comeback again. Control Your Narrative was a promotion started by EC3 in 2022 following his WWE departure, and it was a promotion that was doomed from the start, so let me explain why. EC3's return to WWE in 2018 was less than stellar. If you don't remember, EC3 first signed to the WWE in 2009 as Derek Bateman, where he never really did anything and kinda just jobbed before he left in 2013 to go to TNA, where he'd reform into EC3 and reinvent himself as a star. And like I said, he returned in 2018 to WWE, but unfortunately nothing changed in this return, and he was back to his jobbing ways, being part of the 24/7 jobber division and being released from the company on April 15th, 2020. After leaving the WWE though, there was excitement about what he would do next and a return to form for EC3. He would return to Impact and also have a run in Ring of Honor, but unfortunately, the stuff he was doing in those two companies just wasn't a hit whatsoever. He was doing a weird character where he was trying to free his narrative and control his narrative, and he ran a stable literally called Free the Narrative, and to be honest, the entire time EC3 did this gimmick, I just didn't get it. And I still don't get it. And I don't think I'm the only one. This gimmick really wasn't hitting, so when it was announced he'd be running a show in May 2021 based around the gimmick, it was met with skepticism. The show would be titled Free the Narrative and would be main evented by EC3 versus Matt Cardona. The show was filmed in a small dark room with weird music and voiceovers, and it was just awful. It was terrible and difficult to watch, the wrestling wasn't good, the voiceovers were nonsensical and needless. In fact, every aspect of production was nonsensical and needless in this entire show. It was really hard to understand what was going on, just like EC3's gimmick. But nonetheless, EC3 would run a second Free the Narrative show that same year, this time with Adam Scherr, aka Braun Strowman, in the main event against him, and this show was no better than the first one. If you want to see these shows for yourself, by the way, for whatever reason, then check the link in the description where myself and BDE reacted to some of these awful shows last year. But despite both of these shows being dreadful and having no appeal, EC3 still wanted to do more, and so in March of 2022, Control Your Narrative was born, and they would begin announcing blockbuster members of their roster: Wesley Blake, Killian Dane, Flip Gordon, Scotty 2 Hotty, Austin Aries were all a part of it, as well as the three main faces of the promotion, EC3, Braun Strowman, and Karrion Kross. They announced an international TV deal to go along with it, which was just that they would be airing their shows on Pro Wrestling TV, which was an app for pro wrestling shows to air on. Spoiler alert, they didn't air any actual weekly wrestling shows on here, and as far as I'm aware, this app also doesn't exist anymore and isn't in operation. So the TV deal was clearly a massive success. They also released merch including the infamous "We Live in a Society" shirt, but what about the actual wrestling? Well, they ran one broadcasted show called The Awakening, and it was probably one of the worst wrestling shows I've ever seen. Pretty much all the same problems as the Free the Narrative shows, but just longer. Despite the low quality of shows and seemingly not many fans for the shows, they announced a nationwide tour of shows across the country. Control Your Narrative was moving quick, and maybe a little too quick, as not too long after the formation of CYN, Karrion Kross and Braun Strowman were both re-signed to the WWE and would leave EC3 and Control Your Narrative in the dust to return to the WWE. And the ticket sales for that big nationwide tour they were doing were not doing well, which, without Kross or Strowman, was always going to happen anyway because nobody was watching this show. And EC3 would ultimately pack it up with Control Your Narrative after just 4 months and after the brand lost all of its stars. EC3 is doing just fine now as the NWA World Champion, but says the stigma around Control Your Narrative damaged his career. There's one thing that's damaged for sure though, and that's my brain after watching Control Your Narrative. Now, after reading the words "What Culture Pro Wrestling," you're probably thinking one of two things. You're thinking either, whoa, since when did What Culture have a wrestling promotion? Or you're thinking, damn, putting WCPW on here is pretty harsh. And I'll be honest, it definitely is harsh, because unlike Control Your Narrative, WCPW was really a solid product throughout the time it was around. However, there's no denying that certain decisions and big changes the company made hurt the company in the long run, and we'll get there in a second, but for now, let me talk to you about What Culture Pro Wrestling if you didn't even know it existed. What Culture Pro Wrestling, or WCPW, was announced in May of 2016 by the wrestling YouTube channel and website What Culture, of course. They would run a weekly show on YouTube titled Loaded and would start running monthly pay-per-views. They were mainly focused on the British wrestling scene, and their roster was mostly made up of wrestlers from BritRes, many of whom would go on to become big stars. Tegan Knox, Piper Niven, Joe Hendry, Kaylee Ray, Tyler Bate, Blair Davenport and Will Ospreay and many more were all BritRes stars who all turned up at WCPW at one point or another, but where WCPW stood apart from other indie promotions was all the international talent they used to bring in. For the first year of WCPW, we would see names like Kurt Angle, Cody Rhodes, Ricochet, Rey Mysterio, Drew McIntyre, The Young Bucks, Adam Cole, Matt Hardy, Matt Riddle, Bully Ray, Jay Lethal, EC3, Minoru Suzuki, and even guys like Damien Sandow and Jack Swagger. They were just some of the international stars at the time that featured on WCPW in their first year. And with this level of talent came some great moments, great matches, great shows, and a loyal fan base. However, this was not a sustainable business model, and WCPW weren't going to be able to spend on talent like they were doing forever, and that meant in 2017 that WCPW had to undergo some changes, and these changes would ultimately kill the company. The first big change would take place on the 30th of September 2017, about 18 months after the formation of WCPW, and it was announced that WCPW would be renaming to Defiant Wrestling. And I actually think it was the right move to rename the promotion. They clearly didn't want the What Culture name attached to the brand forever, and so they did something about it. The issue is though, is that WCPW was far superior to what Defiant was, and WCPW and Defiant were pretty much two entirely different companies. WCPW was a super indie that flew talent from all over the world and had them cross over and face each other, and that's where most of their viewership came from. Defiant, however, was just another BritRes promotion, and when they made the switch to Defiant, they also made the change to stop flying in international stars, meaning no more Codys, Rey Mysterios, and no more talent from elsewhere, and this killed viewership for the long run for Defiant, as while the talent they had was still decent and the shows weren't bad, they had alienated their fan base by doing this, as your average WCPW viewer was watching for the big international stars and not the local stars. And by the end of Defiant Wrestling's run, there weren't many fans that had still stuck around as compared to the WCPW days. Defiant existed for another year and a half before officially on the 2nd of August 2019, Defiant Wrestling shut its doors for good, with the last year of Defiant programming losing viewers with each event that passed. WCPW was good while they were around, but they definitely blew their load too early, and all in all, overall WCPW was fun, but it was never made to last. Recently, I did a video discussing all of Hulk Hogan's failed business ventures, and I briefly mentioned in that video that Hulk Hogan was a wrestling promoter for a bit of time. As in November of 2009, the Hulkamania Let the Battle Begin tour went down under to Australia for a week of wrestling shows across the country. And I need to talk about it in more detail than I did in that video, because these shows really were quite something. And I'm not quite sure what Hulk Hogan was cooking. So like I said, the Hulkamania Let the Battle Begin tour was a tour being promoted by Hulk Hogan and also Eric Bischoff. What could possibly go wrong? 4 shows across 4 Australian cities: Sydney, Melbourne, Perth and Brisbane. So what do we say we look at the results of the first night of these shows? Because oh boy, Nick Dinsmore, formerly known as Eugene, and the Pimp Father, aka the Godfather, defeated Rock of Love. I have no idea who these guys are. Brutus Beefcake defeated Heidenreich. Spartan 3000, who was Matt Cross, defeated Shannon Moore. The Nasty Boys defeated Vampire Warrior and Black Pearl. Mr. Anderson defeated, is that Val Venus? My word, what is Hulk Hogan's obsession with Val Venus, man? And then we had a Too Cool reunion. Brian Christopher and Rikishi defeated Orlando Jordan and Osu Fatu, who is Umaga from WWE, if you remember him. A true legend of the game, a Streets Will Remember wrestler who, sadly, these were his final matches. It was on this tour before he passed away. These are his final wrestling matches. And then you had probably the oldest main event in wrestling history, Hulk Hogan defeating Ric Flair, and this was the main event of every single night of the tour. Yes, in the great year of 2009. To be fair, they also had the 52-year-old Brutus Beefcake on there. Like, I don't even know where to begin with this card. As you can tell, it's a complete Hogan and Friends card. Instead of using wrestlers from TNA, you know, the company he had just joined, he just decided to invite a load of his old washed-up wrestler friends, as well as just random talent. These shows were how Ric Flair came out of retirement, and so the Hulkamania Let the Battle Begin tour is the official blame for why we saw Ric Flair wrestling just last year. The rest of the tour, all their cards were pretty much the exact same as this card. It was a Hogan and Friends card with a Hulk Hogan and Flair main event. And I really wish official footage of these shows existed and was out there, because some of these matches on paper just look dreadful. Eugene versus Heidenreich, or how about a triple threat match between Rosie, Val Venus and the Godfather? Who wants to watch this stuff? These sound unwatchable. And that's another thing, it is actually unwatchable because there is no official footage of these shows other than select fan footage and photos, and that's because following the conclusion of the tour, the Hulkamania tour company went bankrupt and plans of a DVD release and Australian TV broadcast were dropped. And supposedly Hulk Hogan was owed money by the promoters and refused to release the DVD until he was paid. I'm telling you, brother, you need to pay me at least 6 figures for this Heidenreich versus Brutus Beefcake match, dude. Ultimately though, we should probably be thanking Hogan for never releasing the footage, as these shows sound like they stink. In January 2014, Lucha Underground was announced to be coming to air on the El Rey network, a brand new wrestling promotion. Lucha Underground would assemble a star-studded roster of wrestlers from all over the world: John Morrison as Johnny Mundo, Ricochet as Prince Puma, the Lucha Bros, Chavo Guerrero, Sexy Star were all there from the start of the promotion. Lucha Underground began filming in September of that year, and the first episode would premiere on October 29th. And Lucha Underground, without a doubt, was the most interesting wrestling product I've seen in a long time. Lucha Underground was filmed in seasons like a TV drama, with an emphasis on the segments and stories between matches. And the matches themselves were fast-paced, super exciting, and the camera work and presentation was awesome. It was different and it was great. And throughout the first season of Lucha Underground, many stars would break out for the company. Sexy Star would become a fan favorite, and Helico would wow fans with his crazy high spots, as well as your top stars like Johnny Mundo, Cage, Puma, Phoenix and Matanza holding it down in the world title division. As well as the world title, they had the Gift of the Gods title, which in short was pretty much a Money in the Bank type championship, and they also had the Trios titles, which was the most exciting division in the company and my personal favourite. All in all, Lucha Underground Season 1 was a success. They introduced a unique wrestling concept on TV and really put out some good television. Season 2 would begin on January 27, 2016 and was action-packed just like the first one. And whilst I don't think Season 2 was as good as the first, it saw the debuts of Rey Mysterio, Killshot aka Swerve Strickland, Cobra Moon aka Thunder Rosa, Taya Valkyrie, and many more. Season 3 then premiered in September 2016 and was pretty much the same as Season 2, except with this season there was a lot of weirdness. You know, like the Rabbit Tribe. Despite the weirdness though, it was still a good season and featured possibly the best match in the promotion's history with Killshot vs Dante Fox. And then Season 4 would ultimately be the downfall of Lucha Underground, as most of Lucha Underground's top stars were gone. As Ricochet was in the WWE now, Sexy Star had been blacklisted, and Rey Mysterio had returned back to the WWE. And the roster for this season was an entirely different roster, with the likes of Jake Strong aka Jack Swagger, Joey Mercury, and many others being introduced. This is the season where infamously Jake Strong won the world title on the final episode. Jake Strong did not fit in with Lucha Underground whatsoever, he didn't really have any business being there, and his run did not warrant a world title win whatsoever. Jake Strong would also end up being the final ever Lucha Underground champion, as Lucha Underground has not returned to air ever since a series of lawsuits from many of its former wrestlers. And this is for the fact that Lucha Underground contracts blocks them from working for other promotions, virtually trapping them in multi-year exclusive contracts. And keep in mind that Lucha Underground was filmed in seasons, and there would be months to years between seasons sometimes, meaning they couldn't work. It's now been nearly 6 years since the last Lucha Underground episode was aired, and whilst MLW did try to sort of revive it, we probably won't see any iteration of Lucha Underground ever again. Wrestling Society X was a short-lived wrestling show that aired on MTV in early 2003. And to describe Wrestling Society X, it's basically Lucha Underground but without all the cinematic storylines and more Michael Bay. It's probably the most 2000s TV show of all time. Explosions, action, impact, airing late night on MTV, showcasing 2000s goth indie wrestlers battling it out. And somehow this show's matches were even more fast-paced and action-packed than Lucha Underground. Wrestling Society X only aired for 9 episodes and has some pretty notable alumni. Seth Rollins, X-Pac, Matt Sydal, New Jack, Vampiro, Scorpio Sky, and Teddy Hart are a few names that you might recognize. Wrestling Society X only lasted for 2 months in total, airing from January 30th until March 14th, 2007, and as the series went on, the ratings got lower, and MTV clearly wanted out with the show, with episodes 4 to 9 being aired as a marathon across 2 days, as MTV were clearly trying to rush out the final episodes, which MTV later announced serves as the series finale before WSX was quietly removed from their schedule and airings of reruns were cancelled. MTV effectively just erased the series, probably due to the low ratings. There was actually a 10th episode that was filmed but never came to air as MTV shut the doors early, but this episode can be found in the Wrestling Society X DVD. Overall, I loved Wrestling Society X. It was never made to last, but it was kind of set up to fail from the start, and it's fun to look back on. MTV, bring this show back. After years of various pilot episodes and talks of a return, on the 25th of April 2018, it was announced that World of Sport Wrestling would be making its return to UK television, airing on ITV. Which, if you aren't British, ITV are one of the biggest TV networks here in the UK, and World of Sport Wrestling had originally aired on there from 1968 to 1985, having been a part of the World of Sport programming block on ITV, and this revival in 2018 was a long-awaited return for British wrestling on British TV. So as I said, World of Sport returned for a 10-episode mini-series, and the series aired on the ITV channel every Saturday from July 28th until September 29th, 2018. And it featured many wrestlers you might recognize today, such as Will Ospreay, Kaylee Ray aka Alba Fire, Viper aka Piper Niven, B Priestley aka Blair Davenport, Moose, Kip Sabian, Harry Smith, Doug Williams, Grado, and other wrestlers from the British scene. The show had 3 titles, a men's world title, a women's belt, and tag belts, with their first champions respectively being Dave Mastiff, Kaylee Ray, and Istin Reese and Kip Sabian. And from the episodes I've seen, the show seemed pretty solid. It had very good production, the action was watchable, and overall it was a good TV studio wrestling show. But like I said, this was only a 10 episode miniseries, and unfortunately it would be the only 10 episodes, as this World of Sport Wrestling revival ended up being fairly short-lived. As right after the series ended in September, the very next month the WWE NXT UK brand would make its debut with its own weekly show, and with that would come much of the top UK talent being signed to the WWE for the NXT UK brand. Combine that with AEW forming in 2019 and being picked up by ITV, and World of Sport would fizzle away, and it almost kind of feels like the revival never even happened, as it was that short-lived and insignificant. They'd do one last tour of untelevised shows in early 2019, and that's been about that for World of Sport. Ever since ITV picked up the AEW rights, nothing's been really heard or mentioned of World of Sport again, so we can only assume that the show was cancelled. And with the current wrestling landscape, I highly doubt we'll ever see World of Sport Wrestling make a return again. In 2014, 5 Star Wrestling was released for the PS3 by Serious Parody to critical acclaim. In a review written for Push Square by, Ben Potter, he wrote, "After the latest disappointment in the colossal WWE series, wrestling game fans may have found solace in the knowledge that a fresh contender was on the way to challenge for the genre's crown. Pitched as the wrestling equivalent of Pro Evolution Soccer, Serious Parody's 5 Star Wrestling intended to offer a fun alternative to everyone's favourite grappling simulator, but what we received instead is an even shallower substitute." Okay, so 5 Star Wrestling didn't go down all that well, but the next year, they would release 5 Star Wrestling Regenesis for the PS4. Wow, next gen, whoa, oh my god. The game was accompanied by its incredible roster of Andy Organ, Curtis Angel, Dynamite Pegasus, Greg Harty, Harvey D, Johnny the Bull Maivia, Mike Iceberg, and Ragnarok. Oh my word, what a star-studded roster. This 1-star review of the game read, "This is one of those games I can't be pissed about wasting the money on, as I'm laughing at how bad it is. Unless you can see humour in something this craptacular, avoid this one." So yeah, these games were literally just knockoff wrestling games. Like, they really didn't try, and they really didn't even try to hide it either. They just used knockoff fake parody names, and they were just cashing in on being like one of the first next-gen wrestling games, and being an alternative in a market that WWE dominates. And as you can see from the gameplay on screen, these games were very amateur looking. You know, they look like Xbox arcade style, like, trash games. Like, remember some of the dump that got put on the Xbox Arcade? Like, this is a game just like that. However, 5 Star Wrestling somehow would stick around, and they would actually run a show in 2015. In September 2015, they would run a show in Edinburgh, and just like their video game, it was called 5 Star Wrestling Regenesis. They just gave it the same name. On the show, you had matches like Viper versus ODB, Viper aka Piper Niven, John Morrison versus Ricochet in a 2 out of 3 falls match, and people like Carlito, PJ Black, and others were a part of the card. Not a bad card for what seems to be just a live event, and kind of just like a one-off. You know, it looks like just to be like a one-off to promote their 5 Star Wrestling Regenesis video game. But then the next year in January 2016, they would return for more events under the 5 Star Wrestling name. They would come back for 3 days of events in Newcastle, Sheffield, and Liverpool. And having a look at this Newcastle card, it's very good. Will Ospreay, Jamie Hayter, Carlito, Rey Mysterio, Jay Lethal, Zack Sabre Jr., John Morrison, and AJ Styles are just some of the names that were on this card, with John Morrison versus AJ Styles for the 5 Star Wrestling title in the main event. And they ran the Newcastle Metro Radio Arena, an arena with 11k capacity. Like, that's huge for a wrestling company to be running that. And they had a whole attendance of 500 people. Sorry. They had a show with Rey Mysterio, John Morrison, AJ Styles. They booked it in an 11k arena and got 500 people that turned up for it? What? The next day, they ran their show in Sheffield. They had AJ Styles versus Rey Mysterio on the card, Jay Lethal versus PJ Black on the card, and a main event of John Morrison versus Carlito. They ran the Sheffield Arena, which has a capacity of 3,500, and they got a whole 300 people to turn up for it. For day 3, they ran in Liverpool, once again using pretty much all the same names, once again just in different variations of matches, and they ran the Echo Arena in Liverpool. It has a capacity of 11,000, and I don't have exact figures or any figures for this show, but it doesn't look like, they were anywhere near to filling that out. And using all these names and booking all these arenas must have cost them a lot of money, and they didn't come back for another year, and I imagine it's probably because of that. They would come back a year later to run 5-Star Wrestling in Dundee. This featured John Morrison versus Moose, Rey Mysterio versus Aldis, Drew Galloway versus Chris Masters, and a main event of John Morrison versus Rey Mysterio. It was a one-night tournament for the title, and this show would actually be picked up for TV by Channel 5, aka Spike TV, wrestling back on Spike in the UK. So 5-Star have now managed to kind of put themselves on the map, like regionally. They've managed to run a show on a UK based network, they got their show picked up for a special on TV, pretty good stuff. And it seemed as though their next step was to try take the world on, try get on the map across the entire world. And after these events, 5-Star announced that they would hold a 128-man tournament throughout 2017, and they would offer CM Punk $1 million to appear in the tournament and make his wrestling return. He of course refused, and the tournament would not happen, and they announced it would be postponed until February 2018. Everyone knew this tournament was not going to happen. Like, everyone was just laughing at this promotion because this was just an awfully ran, awfully promoted promotion. And when 5-Star Wrestling returned in 2018, they returned with a weekly TV show. Channel 3 Sports pulled out of a deal with Preston City Wrestling in order to work with 5-Star to promote shows in 2018. Did they think the tournament was still happening or something? Like, what? 5-Star seems to be taking this very seriously. They were holding press conferences announcing new titles like the Tap or Snap title. What on earth? And they were getting more names in there like Rob Van Dam and former Love Island contestant Adam Maxted. The top talent in the world. They ran 4 shows across the UK airing live on Free Sports. Names like RVD, John Morrison, Jake Hager, Rey Mysterio, Moose, Matt Riddle, Alberto Al Patron, and more. They'd film episodes and run episodes in Liverpool, Newcastle, Sheffield, Plymouth, and Belfast, booking the biggest of names and the biggest of arenas, getting absolutely no turnouts. And all those shows I just listed, those TV shows, those were the only shows that ever happened. On the 20th of March 2018, 5-Star would announce on Twitter that they were to cancel all their upcoming shows, owing to the folding of their parent company, Pro Wrestling UK. 5-Star Wrestling was over, just like that. 2 months from a TV deal that another wrestling company lost out on to give to 5-Star is over after 2 months because the company's done. And I mean, it was a matter of time before the company was going to fold. What they were doing just wasn't sustainable whatsoever, and everybody could tell they were literally playing TEW in real life. 5-Star Wrestling has never returned. Jake Hager finished as their world champion. How does this always happen? First Lucha Underground, now 5-Star Wrestling. And though 5-Star is gone, its clones and all the promotions that have been just like 5-Star aren't gone. I mean, just last year, we had Wrestling Entertainment Series, which was pretty much the exact same as 5-Star. It was the Authors of Pain's promotion. They booked the likes of Nia Jax and Alistair Overeem, the UFC fighter, Braun Strowman. None of them were paid apparently, or paid in advance. The show was being ran in an arena, like massive, 2 weeks in advance, and it never happened. It was literally a 5-Star clone. So it seems like the influence of 5-Star Wrestling does still live on. So, AOP of former WWE fame, who were released at some point in the last couple of years, came back from their hiatus and their weird NFT projects to announce that they would be running their own wrestling promotion. This promotion was entitled Wrestling Entertainment Series UK, and it was announced to be running a 10,000 seat arena in Nottingham at just about 4 weeks notice, and no card announced, which is, to say the least, a very ambitious promotional tactic. About a week later though, the card came out and it was pretty crazy. You had the main event of Adam Scherr versus Alistair Overeem, Nia Jax versus Lana, as well as people like Deonna Purrazzo, Chelsea Green, Mojo Rawley, Tennille Dashwood, Killer Cross, Mike Bennett, Jonah, Lindsay Dorado, Samurai Del Sol, Biff Busick, and many, many more. It was a star-studded card, and it was something that UK wrestling really needs a bit more of, which is foreign wrestlers coming over, these big names coming in from America, and it was just something that British wrestling needs. But the issue is that once again, they were running a 10k seater in 3 weeks advance notice. So how well is this actually going to go? I was really interested in the show. I was a big fan of a lot of the people who were on it, and I was going to go to the show, and also got very close to scheduling an interview with AOP themselves, to the point where I was literally texting their manager on WhatsApp. But when I tried to arrange a time and day, I was ghosted by the manager. And then the next day, Chelsea Green put out that tweet saying that the show had been cancelled, confusing everyone as there had been no communication from Wes themselves and their official accounts, until the next day when it was officially announced by Wes that their show had been postponed to what was meant to be today, July 9th. And with that came Deonna Purrazzo, Chelsea Green and Tennille Dashwood all publicly pulling themselves from the show, with Chelsea and Tennille stating that they had a previous existing booking on that day, so they can't make it to Wes, and Deonna Purrazzo saying that the whole thing has been very frustrating, she won't be appearing, and put postponed in quotation marks in her statement, putting into question once again whether this show is actually happening or not. No one really knows anything about it anymore. And you'd think from here that Wes would start promoting their show for the next month. But no, they virtually went silent only until about 2 weeks before the show, and when they came back to start promoting the show again, the card was entirely different. No Adam Scherr, no Lana, no Deonna Purrazzo, and despite the fact that she was promoted, Nia Jax wasn't actually going to be appearing, and had to clarify this twice on Twitter because Wes just kept promoting that she was showing up when she wasn't. They added some new names to the card as well, including Moose, Steph DeLander, formerly known as Persia Pirotta, Eric Young, Big Damo, as well as some BritRes talent such as the She-Wolves, Anastasia, and Zack Zodiac, who is Paige's brother if you aren't aware. And still, it's still a very decent card, but by this point, I think a lot of people were suspicious, if not certain, that this show was not taking place. And eventually the suspicion and certainty turned into full confidence that the show was 110% not happening when Matthew Raywalt, who was meant to be a commentator for the show, wrote a Twitter thread on how he has been absolutely screwed over by the company. So Wes Official TV has cost me time and now cost me income. I was asked to be on this show but had a conflicting booking. I was told they really wanted me and would pay me up front, so as they were former colleagues I took them at their word and passed on my other booking. And since I have been completely ghosted, zero communication, I have friends booked for the show and luckily some of them have been paid already, but I doubt the show will happen. No travel, hotel or any pertinent information has been shared with anyone I know. Now I'm also out a weekend of income due to them. Part of that is on me as I chose to forego my other date, but as I said, I was told repeatedly that for sure this was happening and they wanted me to be there. I would be very wary of buying a ticket or the broadcast of this show. Well, that settles it. This show is 100% not happening. They were officially now just being looked at as a 5-star wrestling 2.0. But Wes continued to promote their show until just a few days ago when they released this statement. Dear fans and followers, unfortunately we will have to cancel the event scheduled for this Saturday at the Motorpoint Arena in Nottingham, England. We are deeply disappointed in the news that we have to share, but with so many talent not showing up, we will have no choice than to cancel the event. Our team works so hard on this event day in and day out for the fans to come out with a different type of wrestling event, and believe that we will still be able to show that in the near future. We do want to say that all our talent that was scheduled have been paid in full, and that Lena Finane was paid her deposit as well while she changed her mind and did not want to show up and wrestle anymore. For now, we will have to apologise for this, but we promise that it will not end here. See you soon, Team Wes. Wow, there are so many red flags with this statement. First of all, they completely blamed the talent and said it was them who didn't show up, and they specifically singled out Lena or Nia Jax, almost implying that she was the biggest offender. It was one of the most unprofessional statements I've ever seen. And something that a lot of people also had a problem with within this statement was the fact there was no mention of tickets or pay-per-view purchases being refunded. Luckily, they quickly posted a follow-up tweet stating that all purchases will be refunded. So that's good news. I don't know how many people actually bought the pay-per-view, but it's good to know that all 350 ticket purchasers would be getting refunds. Yeah, that's right. Only 350 people bought tickets to the show out of the 10,000 plus that were available. That is absolutely hilarious and honestly completely expected. 5-star wrestling 2.0. It's uncanny at this point. Oh yeah, also, you know in their statement where it said all wrestlers booked were paid? Well, apparently not, as none of the British wrestlers on the show were reportedly paid. Not only were these wrestlers robbed of a big platform and opportunity for them, and an opportunity to work with some big names, but they've had money taken from them. It's just straight up carny from Wes at this point. But Mojo Rawley, who was booked for Wes as well and was in the UK waiting for the show to happen, bless him, has took it upon himself to host a meet and greet which is free for any Wes ticket purchaser, and any money that is made from people outside that category is going straight towards the British wrestlers who didn't get paid, which is pure class from Mojo or Dean there, so huge props to him for that. And yeah, if you go onto Wes's website now, there's a big banner that says the show is cancelled.